Every AI success stories you have heard was edited. This is the unedited version. I'm Shubhendu. I put AI into the systems companies actually run on. Subscribe to the integration layer on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple.
Everyone is talking about AI. Almost nobody is telling the truth about it. My guest today has a rare vantage point. He has lived through 4 enterprise technology revolutions from the inside. He watched finance react to spreadsheets, operations react to ERP, sales react to CRM, and now he is watching all of this react to AI. So when everybody tells me about this moment and say that this is unprecedented, he is the person I want to ask because he has seen the movie before. Welcome to the show, Michael. Michael has led enterprise technology platforms and projects, the most recent being at Wayfair, and before that, Amazon. Michael, welcome to the integration layer.
Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you. Let's start here. Everybody is treating AI as if nothing in history compares. Now, you have lived through wave after wave. What do you think? Is it really different this time?
Yes and no is almost always the answer with technology. I think for society, yes, this is very profound in that this will affect a farmer, this will affect a fisherman, this will affect non-office workers. So then the no is office workers. Office workers, I think it's just another wave. It's quite profound, and the tide has definitely changed. So just as in the PC revolution, to resist that and say, I'm not going to learn how to use computers, that would be resistance is futile and unwise. So I think it's yet another wave that you can be drowned by or you can surf. It's your choice.
Yeah. Today I want to walk those waves with you one at a time because the pattern only becomes obvious when you line them up nicely. Let's go to the one that started it all. You spoke about the spreadsheet. So let's start with there.
Yeah. So, for instance, if we go back to the PC revolution, which associated with that was the spreadsheets, how did professionals react to that? Finance wasn't asking for spreadsheets. Many accountants trusted paper, ledgers, and centralized reporting. Early spreadsheets felt dangerous. And they were. They still are. Anyone could create a model. Anyone could make mistakes. The fear of losing control, shadow IT before the term existed, spreadsheet errors, democratization of financial analysis. The accountants no longer had the sacred keys to that. The breakthrough wasn't Excel. The breakthrough was giving thousands of employees direct access to data and analysis. So you may ask, did finance eventually win or lose? I would say both. They lost control, but they gained leverage. Instead of 10 analysts serving the business, everyone became a part-time analyst. The modern parallel is generative AI. Today resembles spreadsheets in 1985. Powerful, error-prone, uncontrolled, and impossible to ignore.
You said early spreadsheets felt dangerous. It's a very strong word. Can you deep dive into double click on that a little more? Why dangerous?
Sure. So you're giving people access to data. Do they have the privileges? Did they know this before? Should they have this? And then do they manipulate that? You look at the Sarbanes-Oxley controls on data and that never existed at that time. So the ability to read data, to see things they hadn't seen before, and once the genie gets out of the bottle, then you look at the ability to manipulate data. Then you look at the ability to analyze data, to say to someone, well, actually, I did my own analysis. I don't necessarily trust you. Again, we draw the modern day parallels. If your doctor suggests to you, okay, your symptoms suggest this. Well, if I can use an LLM to get a second opinion, I can keep the doctor on their toes. I think that's very healthy, but again, it's dangerous that people may self-medicate. They may disintermediate the experts with that. So that's what I think spreadsheets were both highly leveraged and dangerous because of access to the data and the ability to manipulate the data, and then potentially that there wasn't a lineage of how that data had been manipulated.
Yeah, interesting. I was looking at some reports and here's what actually also happened to those since 1980s. Since 80s, US has about 400,000 fewer bookkeeping jobs, accounting clerks. Now, it has around 600,000 more accountants now. So I know we talk about it as dangerous, but the clerical task almost died. And the profession of accountants has grown and moved up into analysis and advice. What's your thought behind like how positive that is? Like, would you still say that the finance won or lost?
I think it's absolutely fantastic that I believe, as a department, the power diminished, but it then became an enablement function. If you look at professional photography with digital cameras, now everybody has a camera. Are they a photographer? Hell no. But you're able to do things that you were never able to do before. And then when you want it done in a rigorous way, there's still a place for the experts, for the specialists, for the better equipment. With that, is it harmful that everybody has a camera? No, not at all. Is it harmful that everybody can build a model? No, not at all. Should you rely on these homegrown amateur models? Depends on, does your life depend on it? Be careful out there.
Yeah, that is the most honest thing anyone can tell a nervous knowledge worker. The spreadsheet did not make accountants safe and did not delete them, but it kind of moved them. The people who thrived were the ones who climbed from recording the number to actually interpreting it and making decisions out of it.
Yeah.
But
so you mentioned earlier, nobody is telling the truth. They're not doing that deliberately. If the truth is an accurate perception of reality, reality is moving. So they are trying to predict where is the puck moving. They are trying to perceive where we're at now, but it keeps moving. So they're not deliberately misinforming. They're doing a best guess. And when reality keeps moving every couple of months, yes, de facto you say, I was very naive about what I thought spreadsheets would introduce to the enterprise. I was very naive about what ERP would deliver. I was very naive about what CRM would deliver. Sure, but keep running the experiments.
something you said about do we trust people building those models? I want to speak to that now, align it with the spreadsheet revolution. Another report, and this is, I forgot the source, I'll dig it up in a bit, but they say that nearly 90% of spreadsheets across the world, they have errors. This is not trivial. A spreadsheet error was actually a factor of JP Morgan's London whale loss of more than $6 billion. This is a report from October 2020. England lost track of nearly 16,000 COVID cases. I know I shouldn't be laughing about that, but that's because of an old Excel file that ran out of rows. So these are like, again, I just want to circle back to what you said about, yes, giving this tool to everybody. Is it good? Absolutely. Is it dangerous? No. But there's a caveat to it, and it kind of changes the whole narrative behind it.
Yeah. So just as location is at the core of real estate, trust is at the core of technology. Do I trust the vendor? Do I trust the hardware? Do I trust the data? Do I trust the app? Do I trust the humans? Sometimes. Trust but verify.
Yeah, and it makes me think because a lot of people I speak to, they sound concerned about AI. They sound concerned about these agents running a job for them. Like again, given the agency to do something. But what we don't realize is we democratized like analysis 40 years ago with Excel. We're still losing billions to spreadsheet mistakes. And we never really had a governance in place for the grid of numbers. Why do we think that stalling or slowing down this AI frenzy or AI development? Can we govern generative AI any better?
Oh, there's many reasons. Extermination of life on Earth. You have to say there is an existential threat. But to narrow it down to the enterprise context, it's a tool that, just as driving a vehicle, there need to be standards for are you allowed build your own vehicle? What speed are you allowed drive on the road? What tests of competence? Are you allowed drive it at 5 years of age? Are you allowed drive it at 85 years of age? What kind of qualification should there be? And we go back to the spreadsheets or financials, and you say, back in the day, the only way we would do that is to have certified public accountants to be able to verify the accounts. There's still a place for that, but it depends on what you want to do with that information. How are you going to use that? Do you need 5 nines of reliability and resilience? If it's a nuclear power plant, perhaps. It depends. It's situational. We don't need as much precision as perhaps we're going for. A lot of things are just directionally representative. I think the power of AI is to explore, is to inspire, and to give you seeds that you grow yourself, and you provide guardrails on that.
Yeah, now we've been talking about like the governance and setup and rules. I think this is a perfect setup for the wave number 2, which was all about control, which is ERP. So ERP implementations we both know that they have become legendary, and mostly in a bad way. And having like, I've worked on a lot of ERP projects, and I want to see or hear from why do you think that has been the case with ERP? Because here is the magical tool which was developed to make things easier, faster, more efficient. But now we look back 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and even today, there's a lot of vendors. There's a lot of new hype about the latest versions of various ERPs right now. However, if you look in general, if on a high level view, these implementations have a very negative connotation to it. Or like when people talk about it, those who have been through that, they think about it very like in a not so positive. I wouldn't say negative, but not so positive way. Why do you think that is?
It all depends on your baggage. If your childhood was traumatic, you will have a negative bias in that. If your childhood was idyllic, you will have a positive bias. If we go back to what I believe ERP was about, was standardization. And guess what? One size doesn't fit all. That we look at the legendary failures, ERP wasn't really a technology project. It was a business transformation disguised as software. Operations leaders discovered ERP. ERP wasn't simply automating existing processes. ERP required changing processes to match the software. Why did companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars implementing ERP? Why did users hate it? Because it was change. Do you really need to make it better if it's not completely broken? Organizations had to do this to compete, to keep up, and to say, okay, how am I going to evolve my business model? It was completely normal for people to resist that kind of change, because if they were the hero, where they were the only person that knew how to configure a new widget, and then all of a sudden they have to learn the standardized way of doing it, or a new person gains that power, that secret sauce from them. Because ERP standardized everything, the software was effectively saying, there is now one way to do purchasing. There is now one way to close the books. There is now one way to manage inventory. ERP unified operations, but it also transferred power from local business units to standardized processes. The modern parallel is governance creates a similar tension. How much freedom do individual teams have? How much standardization is required? It isn't one recipe for everybody, but there is still value in having formal standardized governance, and to say, okay, we're going to federate some of this analysis. That you look at governments to say, how much power should the states have? How much power should the federal authorities have? There are many different ways of running an organization as to where you allow that and what rules you set in power. One size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, one size doesn't fit all. Actually, that's something which I encounter every day while talking to clients on the AI initiatives, and I put it in a very simple way. I'm a car person. I love cars. If you have to go to work every day, you can take, like, let's say it's 10 kilometers away from your home. You can take public transit. You can take a motorbike. You can take a sedan, or you can actually buy a full Mercedes bus or that big van, whatever we call the camper van, and still go to work. The question is, does it make sense for you to do that? If you want to, like, if you have a lot of sort of cash, maybe it does. Or if you really want to camp near your house, maybe it does. But the same kind of questions come with like different models as well, because people are now, should I use this model or with this billion parameters? Everybody's using it. I will also do the same. And that's my answer to them. One size doesn't fit all. And not just to the companies, even if you kind of go to the level of the depth of various processes where they want to implement AI, there is a high chance that you might have a different model suitable for different part of those use cases. And that will be good for optimizing your costs as well. But now going back to the ERP thing, and this is, I was looking at this a couple of days before, a report from Gartner. As per them, they project that by 2027, more than 70% of recently implemented ERP solution will fail their original goals. And there is a couple of examples here as well. They talk about Hershey, who has spent $120 million and they couldn't ship $100 million worth of candy before Halloween. Then their profit dropped 19% that quarter. And then we talk about Nike as well. They roll out to around 100 million in lost sales because of their ERP initiatives. And again, the list is so long, which is a little bit bonkers. So the companies spent hundreds of millions of dollars. Users hated it, and they did it anyway. What did the leaders understand that the users on the ground did not? And I think you're the perfect person to answer that.
Sure. Every situation is different. Hershey is legendary. That was an SAP implementation. What generally was the case I think I've been involved in 3 ERP transformations, very significant shifts. You and I were involved in an SAP implementation for finance at Wayfair most recently. That was blissful. That was a 12-month implementation that didn't overhype the promises, that we were wise enough with the audit committee, with the CFO, with the operations folks. We did not say, this is going to turn water into wine, because people knew it is not magical. We are going to standardize and we are going to scale, that it can give you 10x the transaction volume processing, which as a result of demand from the pandemic is what Wayfair needed. They needed scale, automation. So we didn't overpromise. We chose a technology that we were highly confident would scale. There were other vendor solutions that we deselected because we didn't believe that they would scale with the same certainty. So in the most recent implementation that you and I are involved with, we didn't overpromise as to the business results. If you look at this Hershey example, I think that was the mid-90s was when they were doing this. They were promising magical things about peak volumes, and they didn't implement it. They implemented it just before their peak, which actually caused their production lines to seize. They didn't have the wisdom of dozens of learnings before them to say, don't do this with a big bang approach. So the learnings have happened that as you get into a second generation, Y2K was what drove a lot of the ERP implementations, that everybody was in a rush and they were focused on the tech skills. I need my ABAP developers. How about your change management specialists that convince the humans that their job is not at risk? We have the same parallels today to say, should you trust a model with your profound decisions? Hell no. Run a little experiment to begin with. Don't go with every module of the ERP. Implemented it part by part as to what you want to do. And guess what? It's not going to be a monolith where you have one vendor providing the HR, providing the financials, providing the manufacturing, providing the inventory. Guess what? We have a heterogeneous tech environment where I might have a Microsoft model, I might have an OpenAI model, I might have to mix and match the data, I might store it on different clouds. Heterogeneity is now accepted with that. So we learn from the past. And those that learn less or learn slower are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, and also about when you talk about AI in similar context, how much of the things we want standard out of the box? I mentioned this before, if there are 10 different tools a company is using across 5 different departments, which of their processes deserve a standard model, like a flagship top tier model, or what the I forgot what they call it.
Frontier models.
Frontier models.
Yeah, sure.
Frontier model, or what can be dealt with a smaller, or like a small language model that is hosted on their premises as well. And I think if you also see this from the perspective of AI governance, that's also a fight happening in the AI governance area across many companies as well, because every department, every team is they're fighting for how much freedom do they have to use this. Because some clients, they have, for example, Copilot, and we haven't got the credits yet. We haven't been able to use Copilot yet. Some are like, okay, we have been requesting Anthropic access for far too long right now. We haven't been able to get that because companies are still mulling over, the leadership is still mulling over the governance behind it. And the more I sit in these rooms, I've been a part of CFO Leadership Council, so I meet with a lot of C-suite as well. I feel, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I feel that the AI governance debate is similar to the ERP debate, wearing new clothes. It's not really about the model. It's about who gets to decide.
Yeah.
Is it the local team, or is the leadership, or the headquarters, etc.?
Yeah, totally agree. And again, the answer is not one size fits all. It depends. If you look at this as a game with different stakeholders who may have well-aligned objectives or may have orthogonal objectives, the provider of the model, the provider of the infrastructure, the provider of the applications. When you get to decide, okay, for my business, domain by domain, if I inherit Salesforce as a CRM solution, Salesforce is pushing for you to use Data Cloud. ServiceNow is pushing for them to be the primary source of data. You may have, as we had at Wayfair, most of our data in Google GCP, but you can't make all of them happy and be realistic about it to say, what functions am I going to get where? How much customization of a frontier model do you do? Very rarely, very carefully, depending on what the nature of the problem is. If I look at, for instance, a skill, we look at the disruption that Anthropic caused with the Cowork plugin for legal. A lot of legal software companies lost half their market cap as a result of that. For a business that is not a legal business, hell, they should just use Anthropic's solution for that. Take the plugin, pay the fees, pay the tokens on that. You do not have such special legal needs as your average corporation. Trust that. Yes, verify. You may want to trail with that and choose carefully who you get into bed with, because similar to the ERP commitments that you make, a lot of these were one-way doors, that if you commit to having this ERP, this CRM, they are not reversible on a 2 or 3 year horizon. Those are things that you want to say, okay, I may have a particular part of my business on this model, and I may run a bake-off for a short period of time, but make a commitment to that. There are a few of these vendors that can truly partner to say what is a mutually beneficial agreement for the next 5 to 10 years. There are a few of those. And then you go up the layer to say, who did they partner with? Who did they play fair with? Or who did they avoid in terms of integrating with them? Can the data from Slack get into Glean? What kind of, if you remember the browser wars and compatibility between the messaging systems, that's playing out to say, how open is my solution going to be? It's not rocket science to play out the game to say, I'm going to have 5 major decisions over the next 5 years. Who can I partner with? Or who do I fail with, depending on the scale of your organization as well. What's in it for the vendors? What's in it for the business? Not everybody has the clout of a Walmart or an Amazon as to how they can leverage those relationships. So just be realistic about what's technically possible and what's commercially possible, both in terms of what you promise to the business and what does the vendor get, because there has to be something in it for the vendor.
Yeah, when we were talking about it, you mentioned Salesforce, so that was a good a setup for our next segment, which is basically how we talked about spreadsheets, we talked about ERP, and similar to that, we're now entering the CRM, which is basically salespeople. When this started, the CRM software started to come up, they hated it, and they always said that this is a tool for the management, not us. It's extra work for us. What's your thought around that?
Sure, absolutely. I remember that 2006, I was at Citrix and there was a solution called Vantiv that we first introduced Salesforce automation with Salesforce. The salespeople hated it, as you say. Everybody laughs because it's true. The salespeople felt this is a relationship business. This is an art, not a science. Are you going to standardize this and have a broken implementation the way the ERPs went? They would say, this is extra work. Why do I have to gather data that I know is just in my head? Why should I have to write down all of these irrelevant attributes? Management basically said it's for forecasting, it's for pipeline visibility, it's for customer insights. What's in it for the salesperson? Not a whole lot. They're going to get their accounts divided, given to a newbie. They're not going to be able to sandbag the way they were sandbagging and getting paid quite well. This is why they hated it. It was a rational reaction from the salespeople. CRM succeeded only when it provided value back to not just the customer, but to the salespeople. The winning platforms be systems of engagement rather than systems of inspection. When a salesperson, instead of covering 10 enterprise accounts, could cover 20 enterprise accounts and could get insights themselves to say, here's the probability of that deal closing, that was when it was helpful for them. What's the lesson? Again, it's similar. There's a pattern here. Technology adoption fails when users only see compliance. Thou shalt only use this solution for this. It succeeds when users gain leverage. When they could see that everybody else was doing it, other geographies were using it, they could get insights from it. If we bring it into the modern parallel with AI deployments, they resemble early CRM. Management sees visibility. Oh my God, I didn't know we had this much data. Employees see additional work. Why do I have to generate these new reports? Adoption depends on delivering value to multiple stakeholders first and quickly.
Yeah. If I ask you to be honest with me, how much of the AI being rolled out currently across various companies in North America and elsewhere, what do you think? How much of this is a system of inspection dressed up as a productivity tool?
The most appropriate way is to look at it. If I look at it, for instance, recently at Wayfair, we introduced a tool called Glean, which was fantastic for knowledge discovery. There were so many new employees that they didn't know how to get up to speed. How do I get a summary of these things? Then Wayfair came under margin pressure, and we said, okay, we're going to cut the number of users that have access to this. We're going to go from 3,000 seats to 1,000 seats. It wasn't on a token-based licensing model at all. It was seat-based licensing. There was almost a religious war to say, oh, I can't do without that. I'm so dependent on that tool. That was a fantastic tool that we didn't really know where it was getting adopted and who was dependent on it until we looked to take it away. There are lots of things in terms of coding with GitHub and the agents for assisting there that it just takes a lot of experimentation to really go through it. If you look at the first few versions of Gemini, Baird, if you remember that name, it was truly dog food. And dog food makes you sick. And why should you come back to that? The next year, when they get the next version of this, You made me sick on the last version. No, thank you. I'm going over to GitHub's agent, which is better. So there are a lot of failures, but and also as they iterate, as somebody comes to go back, the switching costs increase over time. So it's not always a failure. And again, the parallels in the pre-generative era with ML. There was a lot of pattern recognition that ML was very suitable for, but there were a lot of models that you go, that the correlation isn't there. The patterns aren't sufficiently established. So being willing to run a lot of experiments and to cut your losses to say, I can't say that this is much better. Fortunately, the switching costs aren't yet that high. I believe, we look at the contracting terms and the providers, you're not getting locked in yet, but depending on where the data resides, it's likely that you will lock in after a while, but just be realistic about your probability of success. To say it's higher than 50, given the evolution, the maturity of the technology, hell no. That's like a 1990s ERP project saying, I'm asking you to invest $50 million and I'm going to get you a $200 million return. Hell no.
Yeah. So again, if I were to make it more synthesized and distilled, and let me know what you think about it. So basically, the adoption or any kind of technology adoption will succeed when people or the employees gain leverage through it. And it is bound to fail the moment you see compliance around it, when people start to see compliance in the project. So just like in CRM, when people saw or thought in the beginning that, oh, this is to monitor me. This is to see how productive I am. I think, do you agree with that in principle? And yeah.
Yes, and it's broader than that. That the stakeholders, it has to be mutually beneficial. So if we take at the average organization, the stakeholders are employees, customers, shareholders, and vendors. So look at these 4 stakeholders and say, is there something in it for them? And, in some industries, you may have other stakeholders like regulators and by influence. And if any of those stakeholders are dominant in saying, oh my God, this regulator is just tying us down in bureaucracy, and this is just a compliance activity, bad idea. This is just for customers. The customers are getting all of the value of this, and the employees are having to work twice as hard. The vendors are, all of their margin is getting cut, and the vendors are making no margin on this. Sustainability, will employees do more work, have less interesting work for a short period? Yes, over a multi-year horizon. And that's where it's not about balance. It's not about everybody gets 20% of the benefit. It's about harmony, that sometimes the regulators may not be relevant. Sometimes the employees may not be relevant. Most of the time, the customers are relevant. Most of the time, the shareholders are relevant. So it's about harmony between the different stakeholders as to what they're going to get this year and over a multi-year horizon.
Which brings us to now. And you mentioned this in the conversations before, that this way is different than the previous ways that we have discussed in one specific and important way. How?
Sure. This time, it isn't about process. ERP, CRM, it was about the process, standardization, optimization. This time, it's about identity. And that is very, very human. Knowledge workers are asking, what is expertise now? What happens when AI writes? What happens when AI codes? What happens when AI analyzes? The spreadsheet, democratized analysis. ERP, standardized process. CRM, standardized relationships. AI democratizes intelligence, which is very much at our core as humans. That's why it can be seen as a threat. Why does it feel different? Because previous technologies automated activities. AI appears to automate thinking. But just because ChatGPT says they're thinking, don't really believe they're thinking. Whether that perception proves true or not, that's why the emotional response is much stronger. The common reactions of excitement, anxiety, denial, experimentation, going through these phases are absolutely normal. Some people will never exit a particular phase. Some people will burn out. It's important to realize that happens to a lot of people. The winners won't be people who compete with AI. They'll be people who learn to orchestrate. It might have been really cool to be a firefighter on a major incident. Orchestrating is way less chaotic. It may be way less interesting for some people. Just as accountants learn spreadsheet, just as operators learn ERP, just as same sales teams learn CRM, everybody needs to learn the AI tools and know what suits them and what doesn't, and how they can get help with multiple tools.
I'm looking at one of the reports from PwC from 2025, just last year, and Pew Research. The data shows the nerves are real. The PwC found that 54% of workers had used AI for their job in the past year. So that means 2024 to 2025. But only about 14% use it every day. Now, Pew Research found that 52% of workers are worried about AI at work. A third of these is they're feeling overwhelmed, and I quote this: for the first time, more people said AI is doing more harm than good than the other way around. And if you talk about all the past waves that we have discussed, the fear was, will this take my job? But based on what you just said and like a while ago, this time the fear is deeper. The machines can think, what am I for? Is that fear rational, or is it exactly what the accountants felt in 1985 with the spreadsheets?
I think the fear is very rational, and sometimes it will cause, it's not that the machine is taking your job, it will cause a disruption that may eliminate your job. Okay, if you were a photographer, that digitization eliminated the ability to earn a living doing photography. Find something new, find something else, adapt. There are core skills and preferences in terms of creativity. If people love to code, competing with a machine on code, you may need to turn coding into a hobby, that you just do that in terms of painting. I love to paint as a hobby. I could have never earned a living doing it, but you then say, okay, if the way I earn a living has changed, embrace reality. You probably have other opportunities. It might not have been as well compensated as an era where you got paid $200 an hour as an ABAP developer. Okay, that has changed. That will never be coming back. So adapt your preferences, your capabilities to the changing weather system, because getting drowned by the wave is sad, but just find, okay, maybe I'm not able to surf it the way I could surf it 10 years ago. Maybe I need to get on somebody else's boat and I'll learn how to sail. I'll learn how to do different things with that. But there's as much opportunity as there is threat. But it's real, and some people will drown.
I honestly love the way you put it together, because I don't know about everybody, but because I consume a lot of content around AI, the kind of content which is being pushed out, it's so negative that, again, what you're saying is also could be some people can say that's negative, but actually that's real life advice as compared to what the different companies, without naming them, they're kind of projecting AI to become in the next few years or so. AGI is here or something far worse than what we have seen in terms of the economic collapse or the societal collapse. And that kind of makes me think. So now, if you talk about all these waves which we have discussed, if you put them together, I know you mentioned that there is a pattern which you see underneath all of them. let's dive into it, and that's our next segment of the show as well. What actually repeats across every one of these
Sure.
waves in your
Sure.
opinion?
So let me put it in threes, as I used to be a consultant for McKinsey, and threes and fives are the ways to do these things. First, data becomes more accessible. We look at spreadsheets, we look at ERP, we look at CRM, we look at AI. That is absolutely true. Second, infrastructure becomes invisible. Do you need to know what chipset you're running on? Hell no. Third, applications become easier to use. You look at video generation. You look at these kind of things that we're able to do. You and I, 5 years ago, were engaged on an ERP implementation. Now look at what we're doing with self-service technology. The apps are much easier to use. So we look at this as to say, look at the pattern. PCs democratize data. ERP standardized workflows. Cloud made the infrastructure invisible. AI makes intelligence ambient everywhere. Am I using it? I don't know. Probably. The technology is never the destination. The destination is adoption. The final stage of every successful technology is invisibility. Nobody says, I'm using client-server computing. I'm leveraging web services. I'm consuming cloud infrastructure. People simply do their jobs. The same thing will happen with AI.
Yeah, there's a old warning, which for exactly this moment in 1987, I think it was economist Robert Solow. He said that you can see the computer age everywhere except in the productivity, statistics of productivity. And then he explained it with a good example of a light bulb, which was invented in 1879. And 21 years later, by 1900, only about 3% of American homes had electric light. And electric motors ran roughly, I think, 3 to 5% of factory power. The real productivity boom that came did not arrive for, I think it was under 4 decades, 40 years or so, that once factories were physically redesigned around what electricity made possible. So if electricity took 40 years to show up in the numbers because we first had to rebuild the factory around it, what is the equivalent of equivalent design, redesign for AI, and how would we ever know if we're doing it right yet?
You didn't get electrocuted. It didn't kill you. That's one of the ways. But we look at it where we say, I am totally dependent on it, but in a productive way. That if I look and I say, try to bring it into your professional life. Try to bring it into your personal life. It's coming to your professional life whether you want it or not. It's also coming to your personal life whether you want it or not. But try to embrace it. And you then say, okay, how aware am I of it, and how do I consciously introduce it or integrate it into what I do? Email is an obvious way that the vendors are doing that for us anyway, in terms of giving you an agent. If you look in shopping, it is certainly not there even close yet with how I do. I may do a lot of search myself, but I don't have good shopping assistance with that. And you say, what am I distinctive at? And what is the tech distinctive at? So speed, the tech will be great. Breadth, the tech will be great. Taste and judgment, the tech will never be great. So try to help the tech. Tell the tech, here is what I believe is ugly. Here is what I believe is succinct. Give the tech context, and you will be amazed at how good it is and how bad it is. That we look at how it still hallucinates, how it still totally gets things wrong, but it's so quick at iterating that I would say trust and iterate. You can't verify all the time, but trust and iterate is a good way to do things both professionally and personally. And you'll then soon realize the potential and the danger.
Yeah, this reframes the whole hype cycle for me, at least. I'm sure for the listeners too. We keep measuring AI by the demo. And history has said this time and again that the demo is the least important part of what we're seeing right now. The value actually shows up years later, quietly, when we have redesigned the work around it. And by the time it truly arrives, we will have stopped calling it AI at all. It would be a part of our lives.
Yep.
So let's end on what people are going to get wrong from here, in your opinion. And what do you think in the next 5 years, specifically about AI? And there's already some market indicators that are shifting and a lot of news is starting to come up. But what does Michael think? What will people get wrong about AI over the next 5 years?
So it won't be one answer. Some people will get different things wrong. What I suspect, or what I try to apply to myself, is I think some people will not take enough risk. I think some people will take too much risk. So then I look at it for myself and so what about risk? It would be a shame not to realize the potential as quickly as it can be realized. If I've got 25 years left in my life, I'd like to realize that potential as quickly as possible so that it can give me that benefit. So for me, I want to take risks with this technology. However, because the guardrails of governance are not in place, be careful what you take risk with in terms of privacy, in terms of financial security, in terms of health. So my answer to that disposition to take more risk is to run more experiments. That because it can be humiliating to see how bad you can be at using a new platform to begin with. So you start snowboarding and you say, I was an intermediate skier. How can I not possibly be good at snowboarding to begin with? You have to go through the humiliation. You get some crash pants, get some wrist guards with this, have some safety for these experiments where you don't risk real money on these kind of things. But I would say a lot of people will be too risk averse and a lot of people will take too much risk. So I'd say in order to take advantage of your disposition is run many, many experiments and then analyze the results of the experiments honestly. That if people are familiar with doing a root cause analysis professionally, when you have a failed ERP implementation, they would never do the analysis of give me the 5 whys on why that failed because of the politics of it. But those are where the best learning is from. And as you have these glorious failures, analyze it, do a lessons learned from that. You will have better learning from the disasters than you will have from the successes. Everybody's happy to toot their horn and say, oh, this $100,000 investment generated $1 million in revenue. Celebrate the failures, the fast failures, and learn from the failures collectively, not individually. Try to learn collectively from that and have this panel where others ask you rough questions that the learning gets applied, and learning from other people's mistakes is the smartest way to learn.
So there you go. You have a business idea, viewers and listeners, a place where we can all share our learnings from the experiments, or what we call in our industry is proof of concepts. So take a part of the workflow or the process, run some POCs, look at the numbers before you use AI, and after you use AI, and see if you're able to, if not add the ROI, or at least break even by bringing AI into the picture. I think that's one thing which is of great advice. And I say this every time and again with all my customers as well. So thank you, Michael, for that.
So Shubhat, actually I'd interject with that. When a vendor shows you these proof of concepts and has these case studies, if over half of those case studies are not failures, which they never are, they're not telling the truth. Now, I understand that they may not have known what the truth was, but be very suspicious of someone who's going to give you case studies that are only successes. Here is why we failed. Here is what we learned. Here's how we applied the learnings. Anybody that only has success stories is giving you the tip of the iceberg, the top 15.
That's really great advice, something to ponder upon for almost everybody. Look for the failures. And again, I think there's a proverb. It skips my mind right now, but they say that failures are the best teachers or something like that. And almost every culture has that. Now, Michael, like myself, I've been inspired by your work for the past few years by like working with you. But I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who would like learn a lot, who have already learned a lot from what you have said. If you were to tell one line to these leaders who are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, especially with all the I'm going to repeat it, not so positive vibe around AI recently, which we're seeing that how is they going to careers be disrupted or the industry is going to be disrupted, etc. What would you advise to a young leader who is actually in this boat and then trying to figure out what do I do to survive? What do I do to prevail? What do I do to kind of grow?
Um, what occurs to me initially is listen carefully. But listening isn't enough. That you have an opportunity to ask better questions. So there's two things that I'd say is listen carefully and ask better questions. That you'll have many personal examples where you say, okay, I've heard great questions, but where you use what you heard to ask a better question, particularly if you didn't understand it and that better question demonstrates you didn't understand ERP was about process and standardization. You thought it was about automation. Not a crime, but to ask better questions is a fantastic opportunity that not everybody takes advantage of.
Thank you for that. And one of the traditions, Michael, that we are building on the show is every speaker leaves with a question for the following speaker. Now, last week, Angu basically left one for you. And let me give you his question. So it was in a corporate setting, does it matter that everybody can tell it is AI? When we talk about the AI generated document, whether it is for FAQs or documentation for the code or anything right written using AI or like even the comments on the code. Now, like what do you think? What's your view on this role of AI in writing things for human in these corporate settings?
I think it's great. I think people need to be realistic on assuming the intelligence is going to be ambient. So if it's eventually going to be everywhere, it's simply a question of, is it this year or next year that this is going to be auto-generated? Trying to mask things and removing your M dashes and pretending it's not automatically generated. Look at the language differences, that the idea that we could have so many people to see things in their native language, it's just, it empowers people better. So I would say it doesn't matter at all. It's going to be that way eventually. So let the effort go into the editing, that you say, to allow something to be so robotic that you don't even edit it. It depends on how important it is. If it's a guide to a new application that is no big deal, fine. If it's an application that's going to potentially eliminate a position, you probably want to be doing some editing on it. So just the value of editing is not to be underestimated, but I'm totally fine with it.
And now, Michael, what would be your question for the next speaker?
So one of the things that I've gained joy from is, have you let AI come into your hobbies? So just as I argued that the reason why people feel so strongly about AI is because it's about identity. has that individual let AI into their hobbies? Now, that may have been as to how they do a rangefinder with golf, or they do pattern recognition. For me personally, it's about how I edit photos with this, that I love what I'm able to do with AI. I don't see it as needing to be segregated. And I think it's very telling as to how much resistance, and it's normal. I would expect a lot of people do not let this new threatening pseudo-intelligence come into their hobbies. See what you'll get many different reactions to that.
That's a question I could have never imagined. So I'm now wondering if I've done it myself, but I'll
So
keep that.
I'll ask you, what is your main hobby, and have you deliberately embraced AI in one of your hobbies?
I would say yes. So those who know me, my profession has been like in ERP consulting for the last 15 years. And before even I started that, I loved making amateur videos on back in YouTube. I remember the first one I made. This was in 2008. I had like 15,000 views. And in that time, it was a pretty big deal for me. I don't know about the industry standard, but I never really stayed to it because honestly, we never had the time with the school and everything. However, now I use AI for a lot of that. So editing, again, I do have a team, but still a lot of those things, creating clips, I do bring AI and embrace it. And I love storytelling. And one of the biggest thing which comes not just in work setting, but like explaining something to someone is being able to show it in a form of a video or some kind of PowerPoint. And I have a few agents of my own, which I don't know if I over invested my time to build those. It took some time, but now they make it much faster. So now that you asked me, I'm thinking, does it make sense? Because hobbies fill you up internally, and if something is helping you pursue them more efficiently, why not?
It's a pattern. As a teenager, I used to take televisions and VCRs, video cassette recorders, for those that may not have experienced them, apart. And occasionally I would electrocute myself. So then when I went to college, after college, I got a job as a COBOL programmer because doing tech was cool. When you can carry this thing through, it's a passion. Segregating the personal and the professional, maybe it's viable for some people, that works, but it's definitely a pattern. And you see for yourself using this platform to extend it's commingling your hobbies with what you were doing anyway, where it can be mutually beneficial. So I think it's fascinating to hear your pattern.
Thank you, Michael. And for the viewers, again, we have approached the top of the hour. So I know this is not the end of our conversation, Michael. We continue having this. We did cover a specific theme today. And here's what shifted for me after having this discussion with you. I came in thinking or wanting to know if AI is different because I have not been in all of those technology revolutions. And I'm leaving convinced that that was indeed the wrong question. Every wave felt different from the inside, and every wave followed the same arc, though: fear, the adoption, and then is invisibility. The work is not to predict the wave, and that's all the younger listeners should pay heed to this. It is to redesign around it before everybody else does. So, Michael, thank you. This was a masterclass. And for the viewers, if this gave you a new way to see the moment we are in, subscribe whenever you are watching or listening, and I will see you next week. This week being the integration layer. Thank you.
Be safe. Take care.